Hello everyone, and welcome to creating armored characters. Here is our finished piece, rendered in Marmoset. I'll be going through every stage of creation for this, starting with the concept sculpt, all the way up to final texturing and presentation. So, let's get into it. Hey guys, before we start concept sculpting, we need some concepts to sculpt from. I'll be using this 15th century Italian armor. These images are from photobash.org. You can check those guys out. Otherwise, you can use Google Images. Standard places to find good reference. Always make sure you've got something high resolution, like here. You can really go in and see all the details that we'll be needing for the texturing stage later. For now, we just need the broad shapes. This should give us enough to start from, as well as getting lots of different angles so we can see how things connect to each other, how this bracer is buckled together, how it connects to the gauntlet here. I'll be going into more detail about how things fit together when we're actually concept sculpting. It's good to have a diagram here, just the names of everything. If you need to Google more specifics about certain areas, this kind of stuff always helps. As well as that, I've got some details and interesting areas we want to add later. For example, this engraving here, this little fastener here will help us see how the gauntlet is held together. Some more shots of different sabatons for later. Things like getting good shots of buckles is always very handy. You can really sell your armor by making sure things connect realistically. So yeah, that's our concepts ready to go. Okay, let's get started. As you can see here, I've got a base mesh to work from. This will be provided in the project files. You can either use your own or use this. I'd suggest making at least basic mesh to work from. This will make your armor a lot more realistic than working in the dark, and will make it a lot simpler to concept from. We're going to start with the torso armor here, just by extracting and using smooth brushes and clay build-up brushes to soften out the forms. Here I was just deleting the back faces and filling it all in. Now doing some Dynamesh to give us some resolution. I'll work with quite a low resolution just so we can keep things a lot more fluid. Just continuing to fill out the gaps created by the muscles. A piece of armor like this would be quite rounded and smooth, but would still follow the contours of the body. And that's very important for making a convincing armor. It's by making sure it flows with the rhythms of the body. And I'll be going into more detail about that as we go through. Here I'm using Dam Standard to make the front crease that you sometimes see in armors. This isn't just a armor for a beer gut, it's to make sure any glancing blows are deflected away from the body. And we're just going to spend some time polishing it, making sure it's a nice smooth curve. Here I'm just using Orbs Cracks to add some landmarks of where the armor will separate. I'll be doing this a lot throughout to make sure I make it in a high poly. It's just like a visual note, essentially. It doesn't have to be perfect at the moment. The 3 brushes I mainly use for this is just clay tubes to get the main forms in, snake hook or move to move things around, H polish to get those planes in and smooth everything out, and some Orbs cracks and Dam Standard for any sharp edges or lines. You can see the bottom of the torso armor, its main shape flows with the position of the pelvic bone. As someone puts on a piece of armor, their body becomes a bit squashed inside, so it's alright to move around some pieces of anatomy to make sure our armor fits around it. You saw there I did with the muscles around the pelvis and just on the pecs as well. Here I'm checking the silhouette of our torso armor so far, making sure it's got a nice V shape to it, following the lines of the body. The way to quickly do that is just to hit V in ZBrush. It'll switch the color from white to black, and generally a matte cap will show up as black, and it will give us a good sense of the silhouette. Right, moving to the folds, or skirt armor as I call it. Once again, we'll be just using extract mesh from Subtool using a mask. Here I'm just making sure, once again, the line follows the flow of the pelvis, so give us a nice, like, tipped forward look. So a few tools I have up in my custom menu is just delete hidden and close holes, as I use that a lot after extracting armor. I like to delete all the inner faces and close them up. Just it gives me more of a chunky shape to work from. If it's just really thin, it's harder to work with. Once again, just smoothing out the anatomical landmarks, but still keeping the overall feel. Just adding in some landmarks of the armor where all the plates sit, just using Orbs cracks. Key point of this section is to make sure our armors all fit together, and this is a good time to figure that out rather than in the high poly when we have more complex meshes to work with. This lets us make really quick changes on the fly. Here I'm making sure the armor flows nicely with the shape of the hips, giving a slight feminine appearance. Here I'm just making sure the torso armor sits nicely and connects well with the skirt armor. You want all your pieces of armor to be working together and looking as though they're fitting in a way that someone's thought about it. Similar to how if you were to do an anatomical sculpt, you make sure all the muscles sit and flow together and work nicely together. As you can see, I don't have a back view to work from. A good way to make things up is to just follow your anatomical landmarks and any pre-existing lines or shapes made by parts of the armor you can see. You will always need to be making some artistic judgments when it comes to stuff like this. What's interesting about this set of folds is that they sort of curve in slightly just above the knee, and that's where the belt buckles will connect. Here I'm just adding a landmark to where the edge of the armor will be rolled or sort of bent into a curved edge. This doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to be, a little note for myself to add that later. Once again, making sure all the segments of this armor all flow nicely together. Just exaggerating the segments of the armor a bit, just so I know that later on when it comes to making the high poly that they're overlapping going from bottom to top, as you can see in the concept. Right, now onto the greaves and lower leg armor in general. Once again, just start off by extracting. What's important when it comes to leg armor is to follow the flows and rhythms of the leg. This is why working from a base mesh helps us with. You don't want to make your leg armor just plain cylinders. You don't want it to work against the anatomy. Just smoothing out the knee area so we have something to work from, but not completely melting away the anatomy. Just adding a nice spine down the middle of the leg armor. It's a shape that happens a lot with this kind of armor. There's like nice ridge down the center, and it's a theme that we'll be carrying on throughout the rest of it. Now we're just going to add in some landmarks to show where the different panelings of the knee come together. As you can see, I've just kept the main shape of the knee, and I'm just going to be essentially simplifying it into planes. So this is quite a complex area with lots of overlaying bits of armor. Now is a good time to figure out how it all pieces together. For this specific knee armor, it'll be essentially two different panels on the top and two on the bottom, bolted together to the center, and then connecting to the greaves or the shin pad armor at the bottom, and then connected to the thigh armor at the top. So it'll just be one long piece of armor, similar to how the arm armor is connected. So you can see the shape created by the knee is then echoed through the panels at the top and the bottom, sort of triangle shape. It's important to carry on that kind of shape language throughout your armor. We'll be seeing it again when it comes to the greaves and bracer. Here I'm just adding the split between the front and the back of the armor, of the leg armor. Again, just a landmark for myself later to remember to split those two. Here I'm just cutting out the back of the knee. Generally places like the back of the knee or the pit of the elbow or the armpit will not have any armor on them. They'll be covered with chainmail or something, or a gambeson, just something with a lot more maneuverability. When designing your own armors, I would avoid putting hard bits of armor on areas where you'll see a lot of movement. And always think about how your character is actually going to move around this armor. They're not just entombed in it. Here I'm just pushing out the knee armor, so to remind myself when it comes to high poly of the layering of the different armors. Since the places that are lobstered together, like the knee or later on the upper arm, when they move, they sort of shift over each other and slide over each other. And it's important to suggest that functionality in your armors. You want the player or the viewer to think as though this could actually work together. Here I'm just testing the silhouette, making sure it still has recognizable shapes of the legs, even with no color. Now onto the gauntlet and bracer. Again, just start by extracting. Since the gauntlet just sits over the fingers, I'm just going to simplify the shape. Even though the bracer is just a cylinder, it's still important to make sure it follows the shape of the arm rather than just a straightforward cylinder. Here I'm just cutting in the triangle shape on the top, which is a shape similar to the thigh armor, and again making a convincing set of armor look like it's all from the same piece means repeating some shapes. Now with the gauntlet, it'll be mainly protecting the back of the hand and just over the thumb. This is so that during a fight, the knight will still have all the usability of their fingers while having the protection of the back of their arm. I'm going to make this large bowed shape that's coming off and flaring off the arm. This is so the knight will have a range of movement while protecting the gap between the bracer and the gauntlet, so they can't have their hands chopped off. This creates a nice outward flowing shape that can really complement the rhythm of the wrist and the hand. Once again, bringing that triangle shape that we've seen a few times before now. Just using some clay build-up and H-polish to make some more established planes. Just making sure we try and nail that flared out shape in the concept stage so we know what we're doing in the high poly. Now just cutting out the lobstered segments. As you can see in the concept, they sort of start just behind the thumb and go down to the top of the knuckles. Just using clip curve to bash the shapes in that we want. At this stage you just want to be as fast as possible. Not already worrying about how clean things are, just making sure we have all of the information we need. Similar to how you would do a 2D concept, you'd never be given a completely fully rendered concept, you'd just be given the broad strokes and you'd understand that these areas need to be interpreted this way, etc. This is what we're doing for our concept sculpt, except we have the added benefit of we can trace in 3D over this when it comes to the proper high poly. Once again, adding that nice spine down the center. Just gives us a nice line down the middle, nice strong shape. As you can see in the concept, it creates a nice specular hit on the front and then a shadow on the other side. You're just adding the rolled edge that will be made in a lot of segments of armor. And it's so nice. Frames the piece of armor nicely. So if ever your armor is feeling a bit naked, it might be an idea to add a rolled edge or some sort of exaggerated edge. Right, now we've got the base gauntlet ready, we can start adding the lobster sections. Once again, you can see on those edges you have those triangled swept back shapes similar to what we have in the knee armor. Again, it's all about having a consistent shape language. You know, if you have lots of rounded points, make sure that's reflected in your various pieces of armor. Not only does it mean you have a consistent looking piece of armor, it also means it's quite easy to later on figure things out. So for example, if you need to finish up a shape on one piece of armor, you can just draw on the established shape language from other pieces of armor that you have. So you can see for now the lobstering of the gauntlet is very basic. We just need to know how many there are and whereabouts they sit. We'll be doing all the nice overlapping later in the high poly. Just some bolts as a visual landmark. Make sure we have enough space in between each section. The bolts is where the lobster armor would hinge off of and move. Now just mirroring the mesh, make sure it works on the other arm as well. It's good to not just work from one side, just it's the equivalent of sort of flipping an image if you're drawing or painting. It'll sort of reset your brain and let you see any mistakes you've made. Right, now just adding the under part of the gauntlet, so he actually attaches to his arm. With this it would just sit below the thumb, just below the bend of the wrist. You can see in the concept it's a bit swept out, so it will allow for some movement, and the bracer along the forearm will slot into the gauntlet. You can see it was quite easy to quickly just add this area that I forgot to add before, because we're still just in concept sculpting mode, even though we're working from real live reference. It lets us figure things out as we're doing them, rather than starting with a high poly and realizing, oh, you know, I don't know how this works. So you'd just be wasting time then. This gives us a nice head start for later. Again, it's just basically bashing into place using H-polish, snake hook, and clay tubes. Just gives us that really quick result. Nice orbs cracks to give us some lines to follow. Here I'm just making sure it has a nice flow down from the top of the flared part of the gauntlet to above the bump that's created by the wrist. It gives us a lovely rhythm there down to the bottom of the arm. Just adding a cut to the bracer to make sure we have a correct split between the two. Even though it's quite hidden, this brace is still important as it connects to the elbow armor and upper arm armor. Okay, now onto the upper arm armor. Once again, start with masking things out. This armor, like the knee armor is lobstered and segmented, sort of like a half cylinder over the outer part of the arm. Here I'm just making a cavity of where the elbow will bend in. Generally this will be unarmored and will be covered with chainmail or gambeson. Once again, this shows how handy it is to work from a base mesh because we just know where our character will move. A straightforward piece of armor this. It's just 4 overlaid panels sitting on top of each other. It joins to the bracer via the elbow pad armor, which we'll do later on, and it joins to the pauldrons or shoulder armor, which then in turn joins to the torso armor via buckles, so it all slots together nicely. You can see the inside is not armored. This is so it'll be easier to move the arm. Once again, that sort of softer inner area will be covered by chainmail. Here I'm just mirroring the shape from the front to the back, as that elbow will be covered by a piece of armor. Now just adding in some landmarks for the lobstered armor. So you can see in the concept, as well as the pauldron, you have 5 different layers. That's mirrored in the gauntlet armor, which also has 5 pieces, and the knee pad as well. So it's important to keep those numbers similar to give a sense of unity to the armor. Right, now moving on to the pauldrons, or the shoulder pad armor. And this will add some additional protection to the chest and the shoulder. And we'll slide over the torso armor. Going to be working on one side since they're asymmetrical, and then we'll add the asymmetry after we've finalized this side. So we're still keeping the shape caused by the shoulder going into the pec, but just softening it out slightly, just hinting at it. So give our armor a nice, more natural look. We want to always keep in mind the underlying anatomy to give it a satisfying, natural appearance. Just quickly adding that swept back detail to the upper arm armor that we saw before in the gauntlet. As we add different pieces of armor in, we start to get a better sense of how it all fits together, so we do adjustments to other sections as we go. Once again, just adding a rolled edge to the back of the upper torso armor. So when our knight leads back, they don't cut themselves. Again, that's the thing to think about when designing armor. Users are going to hurt themselves while they're using it. These starting to come together. Once again, just cutting out the different sections, just so we know how things overlap for the high poly later. What I really like about these is that they have a nice, well, not like dent, but sort of nice shape going into the armpit, which creates quite a natural feeling to it, rather than it just ignoring that shape and going straight across from the shoulder to the pec. Right now that we've mirrored these pauldrons, we can start to see how the shoulder armor all fits together. The asymmetry in the pauldrons is for, I believe, adding more protection to the right side of the body. This is because the knights would usually be right-handed. This would be their sword arm. So add more defense to the area that will be exposed more as the knight moves his arm up and down. Just adding in some more resolution to this area using Sculptris Pro feature in ZBrush. You can do that by getting any brush, in this case I used Inflate, setting the Z add to 0 and activating Sculptris mode. This will just add more resolution to the area without actually affecting the mesh. So it's a great way of quickly boosting the resolution in an area without having to re-dye the mesh or subdivide. I use it a lot for when it comes to like sculpting faces. Like I just want more resolution in the eyes or the mouth or the nose. Since I don't have any reference of the back, I'm just making it up based on what I know. This shape sort of follows down with the back muscles and the shoulder blades while mirroring the shape at the front. The pivot point of these would be where it buckles to the torso armor. So when he raises his arm, it'll pivot just next to the shoulder. Right, now moving on to the gorget, or neck armor. Normally it's separated into its own piece, but as I find out during this concept sculpt, it's actually part of the helmet as one section. Moving in to fit nicely on top of the torso armor. You can see in the concept it sort of slots just behind the top of it. Just using clip curve to cut out the pieces. Quite a basic shape, just a flared cylinder essentially. just following the flow of the trapezius muscles from the neck to the scapula. It doesn't give us that much, if we were wearing this in real life, it wouldn't give us that much maneuverability due to the neck being quite an important place if you wanted to cut someone in a fight. So for this armor, they sacrificed mobility in the neck for extra protection. So whereas softer areas such as the knee and elbow pits would be covered in chainmail, this will be covered in proper armor. The two different sections, the sort of slight lobstering on this, will give some maneuverability. So again, just using Orb's cracks to cut in those landmarks for later. For those, to push out those rolled edges, I'm just using an inflate brush just across the edge. Give us a nice puffy shape. Making sure the overall shape of the gorget is nice and rounded. As you can see on the bottom of my ZBrush, I've got quick access to masking and selection tools. It's always good to have that close by. I have my main brushes set to hotkeys. Once again, as you put in new sections, you can see how it affects the shape of the armor overall. So just doing some adjustment to some pauldrons. And now adding in the buckles. So here I go into quite a bit of extra work for just a simple buckle, but this is just so I know how it will fold over the pauldron and sit on the armor. Just doing this by doing insert cube and then squashing it down, pulling it apart, fixing it into place. Okay, now that the gorget's done, I can start on the helmet. Quite a simple helmet. It's just got a few shapes. It has a visor made of two parts, the lower part for the nose and mouth and upper part for the eyes and forehead, and then has a main piece for the rest of the skull. So when you put on a helmet, your ears will get squashed down, so we can push in that ear shape to have a bit more of a streamlined helmet and not have that awkward. What I really like about this helmet is the nice sort of big thrust out pointed edge. Basically a straight line coming from the chin to the nose and the nose to the top of the forehead, which gives us that nice big wedge shape. Again, similar kind of shape language to the rest of the armor. You have that spine or crease running down the middle, which also runs down the middle of the torso armor and then runs down the middle of the two legs and arms. I'm just adding in the mohawk. Will taper out as it goes down the back of the head, similar to a real mohawk. Once again, making sure it follows the flow and shapes of the head. Just doing some 8 polish to lock in those planes. Just adding in some eye holes, which will be very thin, because you don't want any arrows going in through there. So we want to make sure that our eye holes actually line up with our eyes, so it won't make our head look weird. See, might look as though his eyes are too low or too high. So it's good to, in your base mesh, give a basic face, just so you know where to put things. You're just adding in the large bolts. Actually quite decorative, they won't be that big. They have some engraving on them, which we'll add later. With these eye slits, it gives us a very limited view across just one axis. Here I'm just readjusting the line of the visor, as the bottom of the main piece of the helmet armor would come up and around the chin. Okay, returning back to the arm armor, we'll be making our elbow pad, or coulter, that's how you pronounce it, I think. Since it's quite a complex shape, it'll require a bit more than just extracting it. It'll actually be easier to make it in the high poly, since it is basically a squash cylinder with two flared pieces on the end. This acts as some additional protection to the pit of the arm, as it is quite an exposed area when you're sword fighting. It has a beautiful shape to it, pinches in the front and then flares out into the back to protect the elbow. Just a really satisfying piece of armor. It's not just a simple cylinder. And it's also a really fun area to experiment with designs. You can flare out the edges or sweep them back if you wanted more sort of bird-inspired armor. So this would be joined together with the upper arm armor and the bracer to create one moving part. You can see it has rolled edges all along the ends, as they'll be in contact with a lot of soft parts, so you wouldn't want it to be a sharp edge. Again, thinking about stuff like that really helps making a realistic piece of armor. You know, are they going to be comfortable in it? Are they going to be damaged by it? Always be thinking of stuff like that. I'm just working in the flared area and how it interacts with the rest of the armor. You wouldn't want this piece to just be scraping constantly on the bracer. You can see any armor that's about to hit a moving area has generally a flared out tapered end to allow for a range of movement. You can see the braces poking through our quarter. And it's good at this stage to make sure things are fitting together nicely, so you don't have to think too much about it later. Been caught many times by not making sure our concept is complete, which comes back to haunt me later, where things will just not work together or just have to remake high polys. So it's best to get all this stuff figured out at this stage. See, it's starting to come together. So we've got a nice taper on the inside where we have room to bend the elbow, and flares out to give us protection on the elbow itself. Now just neatening this all up, just so we've got some nice clean shapes to work from later. Just adding the edge where the embossing will happen. Okay, now finally the sabatons, or the shoe or foot armor. Once again, just extracting what's nice about these is that it's basically a very simplified foot shape. It really just is all about making nice big planes of the feet. And we'll be hopefully moving out of the clown shoe phase soon enough. Once again, adding that nice spine or ridge down the center, like with the other parts of the armor. So you can see how it will just look like a bit of a misshapen blob for a while, but it'll eventually start coming together. This phase is all about figuring that kind of stuff out. In reality, this knight wouldn't just wear this sabaton just straight on his foot. He'd be wearing riding boots or some sort of boot underneath. When making armor, it's always good to take consideration the kind of clothing that will be underneath. Normally it'll be boots in this instance, but they'll have a gambeson or chainmail, which gets quite compacted in, but still creates like a layer we need to take into consideration. Start cutting in the segmented parts of the sabaton. Once again, similar to the gauntlet lobstering and upper arm lobstering. So he'll want to have some maneuverability in his foot as he's running, so he can bend his toes to grip forward. Yeah, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it is something easy to forget when creating armor, that the actual movement involved. See, we're just making nice big chunky shapes, keeping the planes nice and simple along the boot. Using the swept back shape on the end of each armor plate, similar to what we have on the gauntlet. Give us some nice pointed toes so we can break some shins. When making boots or armor, it's always nice to have a sort of slight curve up on the end rather than just having straight flat boots. Here I'm just moving the greaves down a bit more, as they were a bit too high up. They will just go over the ankle bones, and the sabaton will actually be quite a bit lower. It'll be almost like a plimsoll, as you can see in the concept. Once again, just adding in cuts to make some landmarks for later, so we know how to separate this out. You can see on the greaves I've got some very roughly sculpted in landmarks for buckles, just to remind myself later of how it all slots together. You can see on the greaves they have a slight flare out on the bottom as they reach the ankle. Just mirrors the rhythm of the bottom of the leg. And also it flares up to allow some movement of the foot going up and down rather than just being straight across the bottom. You can see I just smoothed out a whole area which just wasn't working, and now I'm trying a different way to segment this section. This is what this section is great for, to just concept out any mistakes rather than making all this in high poly and then having to readjust all that. Just be a nightmare. Right, and that's our concept sculpt done. We can now go ahead and decimate this and bring this into 3ds Max, Maya or Blender, whatever you're using for your high poly. This will be a great starting point to get stuck in on the high poly. And I will see you guys there.